Welcome to Crossdressing Stories. Here, we share personal stories, celebrate self-expression. If you're on your own journey or simply curious, you've found your community. Subscribe and join the conversation.
The clash of steel was a sharp counterpoint to the relentless drumming of rain on the cobblestones. Kalin lunged, his blade a silver blur in the gloom of the town square. He parried a vicious strike from a curved sword, the impact jarring his arm to the shoulder. His attacker, masked in black, wood carved with a crescent rune, snarled and pressed the assault. There were 4 of them left. For members of the Umbra Legion, their black cloaks slick with rain, moving with a brutal, single-minded purpose. They wanted the Heartstone, the warm, pulsing orb hidden in the pouch at his belt. And they seemed to want him too. "You fight like them," the leader rasped, his own mask cracked from an earlier blow. "The legacy is strong in your blood." Kalin ignored the taunt, shoving his opponent back and spinning to drive his dagger into the thigh of another legionnaire who tried to flank him. The man howled and collapsed into the mud. Rage, cold and unfamiliar, fueled Kalin's movements. Every parry was a question, every strike a desperate answer to the lies that had just unraveled his life. He ducked under a wild swing, the heavy axe blade whistling past his ear, and came up inside the man's guard. His own sword found its mark. 2 left. The leader and 1 other circled him, their blades held ready. The weight of his mission, the oath he swore to the Order, felt like a distant memory. All that mattered now was survival. He met the leader's charge head-on. Their swords locked, screeching as they slid against each other. For a moment, they were face to face, inches apart. Through the eye slits of the mask, Kalin saw not just hatred, but a glint of recognition. "Join us," the man hissed. "Embrace who you are. The Heartstone is your birthright." "I am a knight of the Order," Kalin gritted out, shoving with all his might. The man laughed, a hollow, rattling sound. "The Order that lied to you about your own parents?" The words hit like a physical blow, and Kalin staggered back. It was the opening they needed. The second legionnaire lunged, but Kalin was faster, twisting and deflecting the blow. He used the momentum to drive his own blade through the man's chest. He turned just as the leader swung again. He blocked, but not cleanly. The curved sword sliced across his forearm, and fire erupted along his nerves. He cried out, his grip faltering, but his rage was a fire of its own. He drove forward, ignoring the pain, and thrust his sword through the leader's throat. The man crumpled to the wet stones, a gurgling sound escaping his lips. Silence descended on the square, broken only by the falling rain and Kalin's own ragged breathing. He stood alone amidst the bodies, blood and rainwater mingling on his skin. The Heartstone pulsed against his hip, a steady, warm beat in the cold night. The lies of the Order, the truth of his parents, the stranger's words in the tavern, it all swirled in his mind. He had won the fight, but he had lost his path. Everything he had been fighting for was built on a foundation of deceit. What had led him to this bloody crossroads? It had all started with a simple promise made at dawn. The day had begun with a promise. Kalin stood at the edge of Master Elian's modest homestead, his pack slung over one shoulder, the weight of it a tangible reminder of the journey ahead. The dawn broke over the rolling hills with a hesitant glow, as if the sun itself were reluctant to witness his departure. The old mentor's words from the previous night echoed in his mind. "The Heartstone must reach the capital, Kalin. The Order depends on it. Trust your training, but beware the path." The Gloomwood tests more than just courage, it preys on doubt. Elian had pressed a small, leather-bound journal into his hands, its pages yellowed and filled with the cramped, spidery script of the seer who had found the Heartstone centuries ago. Kalin hadn't opened it yet. The gravity of the mission had kept his hand still. Elian emerged from the small cottage, his grizzled beard catching the morning light. "You have everything?" he asked, his voice gruff, but laced with a paternal concern that tightened Kalin's chest. Kalin patted his pack. "Rations, a water skin, my dagger, and the journal." "I believe so." "Good." Elian placed a hand on his shoulder, his eyes, weary from a long life, meeting Kalin's. "Do not linger." The forest is ancient, and it remembers things man has long forgotten. Trust the path, but question the voices you hear upon it. Kalin nodded, though the cryptic warning only deepened his unease. He adjusted his cloak and turned toward the horizon. The Gloomwood loomed in the distance, a dark, jagged line against the golden fields, its treetops shrouded in a perpetual mist. With a final wave to his mentor, he set off, the crunch of gravel under his boots the only sound breaking the morning stillness. The journey to the forest's edge took hours, the sun climbing higher as the terrain grew wilder. By noon, Kalin stood before the towering trees, their trunks gnarled and twisted like the hands of ancient giants. The air grew cooler here, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, and stepped past the threshold. Almost immediately, the world changed. The sounds of the open fields, birdsong, the rustle of wind through grass faded, replaced by an eerie, oppressive quiet. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches creaking like old bones. Kalin's hand rested on the hilt of his dagger. Elian had spoken of strange creatures and lost souls, but so far, there was only silence. He was a knight on a holy mission, but in the oppressive silence of the Gloomwood, he felt very much like a boy, alone in the dark. Kalin pressed deeper into the Gloomwood, following a faint game trail that seemed to twist back on itself. The silence was a living thing, broken only by the soft crunch of leaves underfoot and the thudding of his own heart. The trees, ancient and heavy with moss, seemed to watch him pass, their branches shifting in his peripheral vision, only to be still when he turned to look. Born's grumbling from the original story comes to mind, a premonition of unease. Hours bled into one another. The dappled sunlight faded as the canopy thickened, plunging the forest floor into a perpetual twilight. He paused to drink from his water skin, the water cool against his parched throat, when a flicker of light caught his eye. Ahead, hovering silently between two gnarled trunks, was a faint, shimmering blue light. It was no bigger than his fist, a wisp of cold fire that danced in the air, pulsing with a gentle rhythm. It held no warmth, offered no sound, yet it seemed to be waiting for him. Recalling Elian's warning to question the voices, he hesitated. This was no voice, but it was a clear invitation. With no other path to follow, he decided to trust it. He pushed forward, and the wisp drifted ahead, leading him through a maze of thorny vines and over slick, moss-covered stones. It was his only beacon in the deepening gloom. Finally, it brought him to a small, circular clearing. In its center stood a colossal tree, its bark as pale as bone and its branches bare, reaching for the sky like skeletal fingers. It was a gravewood, a tree from the old tales, said to grow where the veil between worlds was thin. Its massive trunk completely blocked the path forward. The wisp hovered before the tree and then dissolved into nothing, leaving Kalin alone in the clearing. As his eyes adjusted, he saw runes carved into the pale bark, swirling and ancient. They seemed to absorb the light, making the air around them feel colder. He pulled out the journal Elian had given him. He flipped through the brittle pages, his fingers tracing the drawings and spidery script until he found it, a sketch matching the runes on the tree. Beside it, a single line of text read, "Where the path is barred by the grave wood, offer a truth of the blood, and the way shall be opened." A truth of the blood? Kalin muttered. What did that mean? A password? A name? His mind raced. Was it his own name? The name of the order? He thought of the weight in his pack, the sacred duty entrusted to him. He stood tall, placing a hand on the cold bark. I am Kalin, a knight of the order, and I carry the heartstone to the capital. The runes remained dark. The tree remained an impassable wall. Frustration pricked at him. What other truth was there? He thought back, searching for another meaning. A truth of the blood. It wasn't about his duty, but his lineage. He tried again, his voice softer this time, filled with a hollow pride he had carried his whole life. I am Kalin, son of Lyra and Ronan, knights of the order who gave their lives in service to the realm. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft blue light emanated from the runes, mirroring the wisp that had guided him. The ground trembled, and with a deep, groaning sound, The massive roots of the grave would begin to twist and part, revealing a dark, earthy tunnel leading down into the earth. The way was open. He had offered the only truth he knew. He lit a small torch from his pack, the flame sputtering to life, and stepped into the passage. The air on the other side was different, colder, heavier, and charged with an energy that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The Gloomwood had let him pass, but it had let him into the heart of its darkness. The passage sloped downward, the air growing cooler and thick with the scent of damp stone. The walls were lined with glowing fungi, casting an ethereal blue-green light that illuminated Kalin's path and reflected in the condensation dripping from the ceiling. After several minutes of cautious descent, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern. The chamber was bathed in a soft, golden light emanating from luminous crystals embedded in the high ceiling. In the center of the cavern, a still, clear pool of water reflected the glowing ceiling like a fallen sky. A figure knelt by the pool, filling a water skin. They wore a patched and weathered hunter's cloak, their face hidden by a deep hood. A longbow and a quiver of black-fletched arrows rested against a nearby rock. The figure stiffened at the sound of Kalin's footsteps, their heads snapping up. They moved with a startling, fluid grace, their hand already on the grip of the bow as they turned. The hood fell back to reveal a woman with sharp, wary features and piercing dark eyes. Her hair was cropped short, and a thin, faded scar ran diagonally across her cheek. "You're a long way from home, Knight," she said, her voice low and steady. It was not a question. Kalin raised his hands slowly to show he meant no harm. "I'm not here to fight. My name is Kalin." She studied him for a long moment, her grip on the bow loosening, but not releasing. "You have the look of the Order about you. Only they would send someone so young into the Gloomwood alone. What are you after?" He hesitated, Elian's warnings about trust echoing in his mind. But there was a weariness in her eyes that spoke of shared hardship, not malice. "I'm on a quest. I carry the Heartstone." A flicker of something, not surprise, but bitter recognition, crossed her face. She finally let go of her bow and stood, slinging the water skin over her shoulder. "The Heartstone. Of course. I should have known." She took a step closer. "My name is Rhea. I've been tracking the movements of those who seek the stone for months. Not for the Order, but for myself. My brother went looking for the truth behind it 2 years ago. He never came back." The word truth struck Kalin like a physical blow. It was the second time in as many hours that the concept had been tied to the Heartstone in a way that felt dangerous. "What truth?" Kalin asked. Rhea gave a humorless laugh. "The Order told you it was a holy relic, didn't they? A beacon of light to protect the realm." She shook her head. "The Heartstone isn't a beacon, Kalin. It's a key. And the Umbra Legion isn't the only group that wants to find the lock." Kalin's mind reeled. A key? This contradicted everything he had been taught. Before he could press her for more, Rhea shouldered her bow. "We can debate theology later," she said, her tone all business. "This cavern is a shortcut, but it's not safe. The Legion has patrols everywhere. If you want to get that relic to the capital, you'll have a better chance with me. I know the hidden paths." Kalin looked at this hardened, self-sufficient woman. Elian had told him to trust his training, but his training hadn't prepared him for this. Rhea was right. He was out of his depth. And if she sought answers about her brother, their paths, for now, were aligned. "All right," he said, making a decision. "Partners, then." She nodded once, a curt gesture of agreement. "Good. Let's move. This way." She led him to the far side of the cavern, where the passage continued, narrowing once more. The air grew colder, and soon they emerged onto a narrow ledge overlooking a vast, bottomless chasm. A single, rickety rope bridge stretched across it, swaying gently in an unseen breeze, its planks weathered and splintered. Rhea cursed under her breath. "Of course. A bridge." She turned to him, her expression grim. "Welcome to the next test, Knight. Don't look down." Rhea went first, her movements careful but swift. She didn't seem to hesitate, placing her feet on the weathered planks with a confidence that Kalin envied. The bridge creaked and groaned under her weight, a mournful sound that echoed in the vast emptiness of the chasm. Kalin watched, his heart in his throat, until she reached the other side and waved him over with a sharp, impatient gesture. He gripped the coarse rope handrails, the fibers biting into his palms, and took a tentative step onto the bridge. It swayed violently, and he froze, his breath hitching. The abyss below seemed to pull at him, a black and endless void. "Keep moving, Knight," Rhea called out, her voice cutting through his fear. "Don't look down." One foot in front of the other. He forced his legs to obey, his eyes locked on the ledge where she stood. One step, then another. The planks groaned beneath his boots. He was halfway across when a sudden, powerful gust of wind howled up from the chasm, rocking the bridge like a child's toy. A rotten plank directly under his right foot snapped with a loud crack. Kalin cried out as his leg plunged through the gap, his body lurching violently. He clung to the ropes, his arms straining, his leg dangling over the terrifying void. Panic, cold and sharp, surged through him. "You've got this." Rhea's voice was a lifeline in the roaring wind. "Use your strength. Pull yourself up." Gritting his teeth against the pain in his shoulders, he hauled himself back onto the relative safety of the bridge, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He didn't stop again, scrambling the rest of the way with a desperate urgency. He collapsed onto the solid ground beside Rhea, his chest heaving, his entire body trembling. "Not bad," she said, offering a hand to help him up. Her grip was firm. "You've got guts. I'll give you that." He managed a shaky laugh. "Felt more like stupidity." "Sometimes they're the same thing," she replied, a rare, fleeting grin touching her lips. The forest beyond the chasm was denser, the trees taller and darker, their branches tangled together in a way that blocked out what little light remained of the afternoon. The air was thick with the scent of pine and something else, something wild and feral. With the sun dipping low, Rhea scanned their surroundings. "We camp here for the night," she declared. "We're too exposed to travel in the dark." They found a small hollow beneath an overhanging rock, a shallow alcove that offered some shelter from the elements. As Kalin gathered dry wood for a fire, Rhea moved around the perimeter of their small camp, her fingers deftly and silently stringing a nearly invisible tripwire, rigged with small, dried seed pods that would rattle at the slightest touch. It was a hunter's skill, practiced and efficient. Soon, a small fire crackled between them, its warmth a welcome comfort, chasing away the encroaching chill of the Gloomwood night. They shared a simple meal of dried meat and hard bread from Kalin's pack. The silence between them was comfortable for a time, filled only by the crackling of the fire and the deep, unsettling quiet of the Gloomwood. The small flame pushed back the oppressive darkness, creating a tiny island of warmth and light. "So," Kalin finally said, breaking the silence as he poked the fire with a stick. "You said the Heartstone is a key. What does it open?" Rhea stared into the flames, her expression distant. "My brother believed it opens a vault. An ancient place called the Sunken Archive. He said it doesn't hold treasure, but knowledge. The true history of the kingdom, the real story of the Umbra Legion, the secrets the Order of Knights has spent centuries burying." Kalin frowned. "The Order protects the realm. They wouldn't bury the truth." Rhea snorted, a short, bitter sound. "Wouldn't they? They told you your parents were martyrs, didn't they? Heroes who died fighting the Legion." She finally looked at him, her dark eyes intense. "My brother found records suggesting your parents weren't fighting the Legion. They were fleeing it. They were members once, long ago, before it was twisted into what it is today. They left when a dark sorcerer took control, and they took the key with them." The words struck Kalin with the force of a physical blow. "That's a lie. They were loyal knights." "Were they? Or is that just the story the Order needed to tell?" Rhea's voice softened slightly. "I don't have all the answers, Kalin. That's why I'm out here. But you should know that the path you're on is paved with more lies than truths." Before Kalin could form a rebuttal, his mind reeling from her accusations, the tripwire snapped. The sharp rattle of the dried seed pods sliced through the night. Instantly, Rhea dropped her bread and snatched her bow. "Get ready," she hissed. Shadows erupted from the surrounding trees. Not the disciplined soldiers of the Legion, but 6 figures clad in tattered leather and furs, their faces contorted with grim hunger. They were bandits, armed with rusty swords and crude axes, their eyes glinting in the firelight. Rhea loosed an arrow before they had even cleared the trees. It whistled through the air, and one of the bandits fell with a choked cry, clutching his throat. The others roared and charged. Kalin drew his sword, its familiar way to comfort in the sudden chaos. He met the charge of the largest bandit, his blade clashing with a heavy, notched axe. He parried the brutal blow, spun, and drove his dagger into the man's side. The bandit crumpled, and Kalin turned to see Rhea fending off another with her knife, her bow discarded after her first shot. They fought back to back, a grim and desperate dance. Kalin's sword was swift and precise, a product of the Order's training. Rhea's movements were more economical and brutal, the fluid grace of a hunter who knew how to kill. Together, they were brutally effective. When it was over, the small clearing was silent again, save for their own ragged breathing. The bodies of the 6 bandits lay scattered around their dying fire. As Rhea retrieved her bow, Kalin nudged one of the bodies with his foot. He noticed a glint of metal on a chain around the man's neck. He knelt and pulled it free. It wasn't a bandit's trinket. It was a crudely made iron pendant, stamped with a familiar, chilling symbol, the crescent rune of the Umbral Legion. "Rhea," he said, his voice grim. "Look." She came over, her eyes widening as she saw the pendant. They weren't just bandits. They were scouts. Sent to find us. "They found us, all right," Kalin said, flipping the pendant over. Etched into the back was a crude map, a winding path leading to a circle marked with an X. Below it was a single word, sanctuary. "Looks like we have our next stop," Rhea said, her voice firm despite the exhaustion in her eyes. Kalin pocketed the pendant, a surge of grim purpose steadying his nerves. The forest was treacherous, and the enemy was closer than he could have imagined. But now, for the first time, they had a destination. They had a lead. The rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the muddy streets of Elder Grove into a slick, treacherous morass. It drummed a chaotic rhythm against the warped wooden roof of the Drunken Worm, a ramshackle tavern perched on the edge of the border town. Inside, the air was thick with the mingled scents of damp wool, sour ale, and the faint tang of iron from the hearth's dying embers. Kalin sat alone at a scarred table in the back, his cloak dripping onto the floor. The Heartstone, a shimmering orb now wrapped carefully in cloth, was a heavy, constant weight in its hidden pouch against his thigh. He kept his hood low, casting his face in shadow. The journey from the Gloomwood had taken 3 days, and the grim discovery of the Legion's map had sharpened his senses to a razor's edge. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. He nursed a mug of ale, listening to the low buzz of conversation around him. Merchants, farmers, and wary travelers like himself, all seeking shelter from the storm. He caught fragments of talk, crop yields, bandit raids, the usual grumblings. But then a sharper voice sliced through the noise, coming from a group of men huddled near the bar. Heard it from a peddler who saw it with his own eyes. The Umbral Legion torched the village of Haramir. Left nothing but ash and bone. Kalin's hand stilled on his mug. Haramir was only a day's ride west. The Legion, once a distant threat from his training manuals, was now a palpable presence, breathing down his neck. "The king's men won't do a thing," another voice grumbled. "Too busy polishing their armor in the capital." A third man, his tone quieter but edged with fear, added, "They say the Legion's after something. Something powerful. Been tearing through villages, asking questions." Kalin's stomach tightened. The Heartstone pulsed faintly, a low thrum of energy, as if responding to the words. He pulled his hood lower. His mission had been clear: keep the orb hidden, deliver it to the High Council in the capital, and trust no one. But Rhea's words, and now this, stirred a profound unease he couldn't shake. Before he could dwell on it, a figure approached his table. A man lean and wiry, his face half hidden by a hood much like Kalin's own. He carried no mug, no pack, only a faint air of purpose that set Kalin's nerves on edge. Without asking, he slid into the seat across from him. "You're the one," he said, his voice low and rough, like gravel underfoot. "The knight with the key." Kalin's fingers brushed the hilt of his dagger. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. Don't play coy. I've been following you since you left the Gloomwood. You've got something the Legion wants. Something your parents died trying to protect. The mention of his parents hit Kalin like a physical blow. What do you know about my parents? He demanded, his voice barely a whisper. More than you do, I'd wager. He leaned closer, his breath sour with ale. They weren't just Knights of the Order, Kalin. They were Legion once. And that makes you their legacy. The words landed like a thunderclap, sucking the air from Kalin's lungs. He shoved back from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floorboards. The tavern's low hum seemed to fade into a dull roar in his ears. You're mad, he hissed. Or a liar. Am I? The stranger reached into his cloak and tossed a small object onto the scarred tabletop. It spun and came to rest in a pool of candlelight. A silver signet ring, tarnished with age, etched with a familiar crescent moon and a jagged rune. Kalin's breath caught. He'd seen that ring before. On his father's hand, in a fleeting memory from the night he'd left for his final, fatal mission. It was a memory he had cherished, a final image of his heroic father. Now it was being twisted into something monstrous. Take it, the man said, his voice softening slightly. And think hard about who you're really serving. Before Kalin could respond, the man stood, melting back into the tavern's shadows and slipping out the door. He was gone, leaving the ring glinting on the table like a poison drop. Kalin stared at it, his heart pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm. His parents had been knights, defenders of the realm. Orphaned at 10, he had been raised by the Order, clinging to the story of their noble sacrifice like a holy text. This ring was a crack in that foundation, a shadow seeping into the light. He snatched the ring and stormed out into the rain, the tavern's warmth instantly replaced by the biting chill of the night. The muddy streets of Elder Grove were a disorienting maze. His mind raced, the ring a cold, damning weight in his fist. Could it be true? The Umbral Legion was the enemy, a blight on the land. His parents couldn't have been a part of it. But a memory surfaced unbidden. A night long ago, rain lashing against the windows just like this one. He was half asleep in his bed, but he heard his mother's voice from the next room, hushed and urgent. They'll come for us, Ronan. We can't keep it hidden forever. His father's reply had been sharp. We swore an oath. Not to the king, but to the truth. At the time, Kalin had dismissed it as a fragment of a dream. Now, it felt like a prophecy. He needed answers. There was one person in Elder Grove who might have them. Silas, retired Order scribe who had served alongside his parents. His shop was a cluttered nook near the town square, its shelves groaning with scrolls and dusty tomes. Kalin pounded on the door, rain streaming down his face, until a light flickered within. The door creaked open, revealing Silas, his white beard a stark contrast to his weathered skin. Kalin? By the gods, what is it? I need to know about my parents, Kalin said, pushing past him into the shop. It smelled of old ink and parchment, a scent that had always meant comfort, but now felt like part of the lie. He held up the ring. What does this mean? Silas's eyes widened, then narrowed with a deep, weary sadness. He shut the door and bolted it. Where did you get that? It doesn't matter. Tell me the truth. The old scribe sighed, sinking into a chair. I warned them this would haunt you one day. Your parents, they were part of something bigger, Kalin. Before the Legion turned to darkness, it was a movement. A rebellion against a corrupt crown. They believed in it. Kalin's knees felt weak. And then, when the sorcerer took control and twisted their cause into something evil, they tried to get out. They stole the Heartstone, the key to keep it from him. The Order found them, covered up their past, and spun a tale of martyrdom to use their deaths as propaganda. Silas looked up, his old eyes filled with pity. The Legion never forgets its own, son. To them, you're not the Order's knight. You're the heir to a legacy they believe was stolen. The world tilted. He was the son of rebels. Of traitors. The Heartstone wasn't a holy relic. It was stolen property. His entire life, his entire identity, was a carefully constructed lie, so I'm one of them, Kalin's voice broke, the words tasting like ash. No, Silas said firmly, leaning forward. You are you. But the Legion thinks you're theirs. That orb you carry, it's not just power. It's the key to the sunken archive, the very thing the sorcerer needs to cement his role. And you are the only one who can lead them to it. Kalin sank onto a stool, the signet ring biting into his palm. Duty had driven him this far. Loyalty to the Order, to the kingdom, to the memory of his parents. But if the kingdom had lied, if his parents had died for a truth buried in shadows, what did that leave him? I have to get to the capital, Kalin said at last, his voice hollow. The council needs to be warned. Silas shook his head, his expression grim. The council won't care about the truth. They'll use the key for their own ends, and they will use you just as they used your parents. You have a choice, Kalin. Keep running their errands and delivering a weapon into their hands, or find out what your parents truly fought for. The words lingered as Kalin left the dusty shop, stepping back out into the storm. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, and the clouds were beginning to part, revealing a sliver of moon. He stood in the center of the town square, torn between the path east to the capital and the shadows that now beckoned from his past. The Heartstone was his charge, but it no longer felt like a duty. It felt like a chain. The Umbral Legion was out there, closing in, and the stranger's words echoed in his mind. You're their legacy. A sudden shout from the edge of town shattered his reverie. The panicked whinny of a horse followed. Kalin drew his sword, his training taking over as instinct flared. Figures emerged from the mist-shrouded alleys. 6 of them, cloaked in black, their wooden masks bearing the Legion's crescent rune. They were armed with the same curved blades he had seen in the forest, and they fanned out, their movements disciplined and silent, encircling the square. Hand over the key, legacy child, the leader rasped, stepping forward. His mask was cracked, revealing a sliver of a scarred cheek beneath. And we might let you live to see the dawn. Kalin's grip tightened on his sword. He thought of the Order's lies, of his parents' stolen truth, of the weight of the Heartstone at his belt. He was no longer just the Order's pawn. He was the keeper of his own destiny, however clouded it might be. Come and take it, he said, his voice steady and cold. The fight erupted in a blur of steel and rain. Kalin lunged, his blade a silver blur in the gloom of the town square. He parried a vicious strike from a curved sword, the impact jarring his arm to the shoulder. His attacker, masked in black, wood carved with a crescent rune, snarled and pressed the assault. He was back where he started, in a bloody circle on the wet cobblestones. But this time, he knew why he was fighting. Not for the Order. Not for the Legion. He was fighting for the chance to find the truth, a truth he would claim for himself, or die trying. Kalin stood panting, blood and rain mingling on his skin, the square silent save for the drip of water from the eaves. The last of the legionnaires lay dead at his feet. He sheathed his sword, the gash on his forearm a burning reminder of the fight. The Heartstone thrummed louder now, an insistent, rhythmic heartbeat in the stillness of the aftermath. The Legion knew where he was. More would come. The capital was still days away, a destination that now felt less like a sanctuary and more like a different kind of trap. Silas's words echoed in his mind, find out what your parents truly fought for. Loyalty to the Order had brought him here, wounded, hunted, and spiritually adrift. Maybe the truth lay elsewhere. He looked at the iron pendant he had taken from the Bandit scout, its crude map a silent invitation. Sanctuary. Was it a Legion outpost? A trap? Or was it something else entirely? A place his parents had known? A place where the truth might be waiting? He turned east, toward the capital, the path of his sworn duty. For a long moment, he stood there, the weight of his old life pulling at him. The honor, the structure, the certainty, it was all he had ever known. Then, with a resolve that felt both terrifying and liberating, he turned west. He took the tarnished silver ring from his pocket and slipped it onto his finger. It was a perfect fit. It felt less like a curse now and more like a compass. The map on the pendant showed the sanctuary to be 2 days' ride to the northwest, deep in the foothills of the Dragon's Tooth Mountains. It was a journey into the unknown, a step away from the light of the Order and into the shadows of his own history. As the first faint glow of dawn began to touch the horizon, Kalin walked toward the town stable. He was no longer a pawn in someone else's game. He was not the Order's knight, nor was he the Legion's legacy. He was Kalin, son of Ronan and Lyra, and he was going to find out what that truly meant. His path was uncertain, his allies were few, and his enemies were everywhere. But for the first time since leaving his master's homestead, his will was entirely his own. And as he rode out of Elder Grove, leaving the bodies and his old life behind, he did not feel fear. He felt a flicker of hope. He was finally on the right path, his own. The journey northwest was a stark contrast to the path toward the capital. The roads here were less traveled, fading from cobblestone to packed earth and finally to little more than game trails winding through rolling hills and sparse woodland. Kalin rode for 2 days, the silence of the wilderness a welcome respite after the chaos of Elder Grove. He tended to the gash on his arm, slept with his sword in his hand, and felt the constant, warm pulse of the heartstone against his hip. It no longer felt like a burden, but like a secret he was beginning to understand. On the evening of the second day, he saw the jagged peaks of the Dragon's Tooth Mountains piercing the sky. According to the crude map, the place called Sanctuary was nestled in a hidden valley at their base. As dusk began to settle, he made camp in a small, defensible copse of trees. He was tending to his horse when a twig snapped behind him. Kalin spun around, his sword drawn in a single, fluid motion. Standing at the edge of the clearing, bow held loosely in one hand, was Rhea. She didn't look surprised to see him. Her dark eyes swept over him, taking in the sword, the new direction of his travel, and the silver ring that now glinted on his finger. "I figured you wouldn't make it to the capital," she said, her voice calm. "The Order's hounds are sniffing around every major road. I heard about the fight in Elder Grove." Kalin relaxed his stance, but didn't sheath his sword. "How did you find me?" "You're not as hard to track as you think, Knight," she said with a hint of a smirk. "Especially when I know where you're going." She tapped a small, leather-bound journal tucked into her own belt, one that looked strikingly similar to the one Elian had given him. "My brother was looking for Sanctuary, too. He believed it was a haven for those who broke from the Legion, a place to hide from the Sorcerer and the Order." Relief washed over Kalin, so potent it almost buckled his knees. He wasn't alone. "Then you know the truth? About my parents?" "I know some of it," she said, stepping fully into the firelight. "I know they were trying to protect more than just a key. They were trying to protect a future they believed in, one free from the corruption of both sides." She looked at him, her gaze serious. "And I know that going to Sanctuary is a risk. It could be a haven, or it could be a trap laid by the Legion's faithful. We won't know until we get there." Kalin nodded, finally sheathing his sword. "I have to take that risk." "I know," she replied. "That's why I'm here. You may have guts, but you're still a knight playing in a spy's world. You'll need a guide." She offered a small, tired smile. "Besides, if my brother ever made it there, it's the one place I might find a trace of him." With his oldest loyalties shattered, a new one began to form. An alliance born not of duty or oaths, but of a shared, desperate search for truth. "All right, partner," Kalin said, echoing their first meeting in the cavern. "Let's go find this sanctuary." Together, they looked toward the mountains. The last light of day was fading, but for Kalin, the path ahead had never been clearer. The next day, they pressed on into the foothills of the Dragon's Tooth. The terrain grew more treacherous, the gentle slopes giving way to jagged rock and steep, winding ravines that forced them to dismount and lead their horses. Rhea moved with a hunter's certainty, her eyes scanning the ground for tracks and her ears attuned to the slightest sound. Kalin followed, his hand often resting on the pommel of his sword, a lifetime of training impossible to discard, but his focus was different now. He wasn't just guarding a relic, he was walking in his parents' footsteps. By midday, the crude map led them to a dead end, a sheer, unscalable cliff face that stretched for hundreds of feet in either direction, its gray stone slick with moisture from unseen springs. "This is it," Rhea said, her brow furrowed as she compared the cliff to the drawing on the pendant. "The X is right here. But there's nothing." Kalin scanned the wall of rock, a knot of disappointment tightening in his stomach. Had it all been a wild goose chase? A trap to lead them into an ambush? But the air was still and Ria's senses were calm. There was no one else here. As he moved closer to the cliff, he felt a strange, faint vibration through the soles of his boots. At the same time, the silver ring on his finger grew warm. He held up his hand. The ring was humming, a low, barely audible thrum of energy that resonated with the stone in front of him. "Ria," he said, his voice low. "Look." He pressed his hand against the rock face. Where his ring touched the stone, the faint outline of a carving began to glow with a soft, silver light. It was the same crescent rune etched into the ring itself. The key, Ria breathed, her eyes wide with understanding. "It's not the heartstone. It's the ring." Kalin traced the glowing rune with his finger. A deep, grinding sound echoed from within the mountain, and the solid section of the cliff before them began to tremble. Slowly, a massive slab of stone receded into the mountain, revealing a dark, wide tunnel leading into the earth. They exchanged a look, a mixture of trepidation and awe. After tethering their horses in a small, hidden alcove, they lit a torch and stepped across the threshold. The tunnel was short, opening abruptly into a place that stole their breath. They stood on a high ledge overlooking a vast, sunken valley, cradled within the protective arms of the mountain. It was lush and green, shielded from the harsh winds and hidden from the sky. A small, clear river snaked through its center, and simple, sturdy-looking dwellings made of wood and stone were scattered amongst copses of trees. The scent of wood smoke and damp earth filled the air. This was sanctuary. It was real. As they began to make their way down the winding path into the valley, a figure emerged from the nearest dwelling. It was a man, broad-shouldered with a thick gray beard, holding a woodsman's axe. He wasn't aggressive, but his stance was wary, his eyes sharp. He watched them approach, his gaze falling from their faces to the sword at Kalin's hip, and finally, to the silver ring on his hand. The man's weary expression shifted, softening with something that looked like disbelief, and then a flicker of hope. "Ronan's son," the man said, his voice rough with emotion. "By the old gods, you've come home." Kalin froze, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his sword. "You knew my father?" "Knew him." The man let out a rough, incredulous laugh. "I was his second in command. My name is Torvin. I followed Ronan and Lyra out of the Legion when the sorcerer's poison took hold. We built this place, all of us who escaped." His eyes, filled with a deep, remembered sorrow, found Kalin's again. "You have your mother's eyes, but that stubborn set of your jaw, that's all Ronan." Ria stepped forward, her expression cautious but intent. "We're looking for someone. My brother, Fenris. He was tracking the same path. Would have been here a year or two ago." Torvin's face fell. He nodded slowly. "The hunter. Aye, he passed through. A good man. He was looking for answers about the archive." He gestured for them to follow him toward the small cluster of buildings. "Come. There is much to discuss." He led them to a communal longhouse at the center of the small settlement. Inside, a fire pit glowed warmly, and a handful of other people, men and women of all ages, their faces weathered but their eyes clear, looked up as they entered. A low murmur went through the room as they saw Kalin's ring. Torvin motioned for them to sit. "Your brother," he said, turning back to Ria, "stayed with us for a season. He was convinced the sorcerer's power was tied directly to the sunken archive and that the Heartstone was the only way to sever it. He believed it could be used not just as a key, but as a weapon to cleanse the archive of its dark magic." "Is he still here?" Ria asked, her voice tight with hope. Torvin shook his head sadly. "No. He left a year ago, heading east. He said he couldn't wait for the key to fall into his lap. He was going to try and find another way in. We haven't heard from him since." Ria's shoulders slumped, but a flicker of resolve remained in her eyes. At least now she had a direction. He had gone east, toward the heart of the enemy's power. Torvin then turned his full attention to Kalin. "Your parents died protecting you, boy. And protecting that." He nodded toward the pouch at Kalin's belt. "The Order wanted the Heartstone to lock it away. The Legion wanted it to unlock the archive's power. Your parents believed it could be used to do something else entirely." He rose and walked to a large, locked wooden chest in the corner of the room. He unlocked it and pulled out a rolled-up set of schematics, yellowed with age, and a leather-bound journal. He spread them on the table. "This was your father's work," Torvin said, his voice thick with pride. He was more than a soldier, he was a scholar. He believed the archive wasn't just a library. It's a focusing lens for the world's magical energy. The sorcerer has corrupted it, twisting the flow to fuel his own dark power. These plans. He tapped the schematics, show how to reverse the flow. To use the Heartstone not to open a door, but to overload and purify the entire network. Kalin stared at the intricate drawings, at his father's familiar, sharp handwriting filling the margins. It wasn't a plan for rebellion or for conquest. It was a plan to heal the world. He was trying to save everyone, Kalin whispered, tracing the lines with his finger. Torvin said softly. But he never got the chance. The Order's knights caught up to them before he could finish. They hid you with a loyalist family and led the knights on a chase, dying to protect the secret. Kalin picked up the journal. It was his father's. On the first page, in faded ink, was an inscription. For Kalin. May you finish the work I could not. Everything, the lies, the chase, the fights, had led him here. He finally understood his legacy. It wasn't about serving the Order or inheriting the Legion. It was about fulfilling a promise. He looked up, his gaze meeting Ria's across the fire. Her quest to find her brother and his to fulfill his father's plan had led them to the same place and the same impossible goal. The sunken archive, Kalin said, his voice ringing with a newfound purpose. We have to go there. The longhouse fell silent, the weight of Kalin's declaration settling over the small gathering. The faces around the fire, veteran warriors, shrewd artisans, weary farmers, all turned to him. They were the last remnants of his parents' dream, a dream that had lain dormant for nearly 2 decades. Torvin stroked his thick beard, his expression a mixture of pride and profound caution. The sunken archive is not a place one simply walks into, lad. It lies beneath the capital, in the oldest catacombs of the city. It's the most heavily guarded location in the realm, protected by both the king's elite guard on the surface and the sorcerer's monstrosities below. My brother went east, toward the capital, Ria stated, her voice cutting through the caution. If he was trying to find another way in, that's where he'd be. And that's where I'm going. Kalin nodded in agreement. We have the key, he said, holding up his ringed hand. And we have the plan. He tapped his father's journal. We may be the only people in the world who know how to stop this. An older woman with hair like spun silver, who had been listening intently, spoke up. It's suicide. The Legion will be watching the capital. The Order will see you as a traitor. You'll be caught between 2 armies. We won't be alone, Kalin said, his confidence growing. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each person there. My parents founded this place as a sanctuary. But it was never meant to be a tomb where their ideals came to die. It was meant to be a bastion. A place to regroup. The sorcerer's power grows every day. Haramir was just the beginning. Soon there will be nowhere left to hide. We can wait for the darkness to find us, or we can carry the fight to it. His words, infused with the conviction of his newfound purpose, hung in the air. He wasn't the boy who had left Master Elian's homestead. He was the son of Ronan and Lyra, and he was issuing a call to arms. Torvin watched him, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. He saw the leader Ronan had always hoped his son would become. He slammed his hand down on the table, the sound echoing through the longhouse like a thunderclap. The woman is right, he boomed. It is suicide. He paused, his eyes twinkling. And it's the best damn plan I've heard in 20 years. Ronan would be proud. He turned to the others. I've grown old and complacent in these mountains. I will not stand by while the son of my friend fights our battle alone. Who's with me? A grizzled warrior with a scarred face stood up, drawing a heavy-bladed short sword. For Ronan and Lyra, he said, his voice a low growl. Another, a nimble-looking woman with several daggers strapped to her leather vest, stood as well. For Sanctuary. One by one, they rose to their feet, their initial caution burned away by the fire of Kalin's words and Torvin's loyalty. A small, forgotten rebellion was stirring from its long slumber. Kalin looked at the faces around him, no longer a scattered band of refugees, but a council of war. They were a handful of fighters against two empires, armed with little more than a desperate plan and a legacy of hope. "We'll need a way into the city," Rhea said, her practical mind already working through the logistics. "One that avoids both the Order's checkpoints and the Legion's spies." Torvin grinned. "The King's City may have walls, but the mountain has roots. There are old smugglers' tunnels that run from these hills to the capital's underbelly. Forgotten by all but us." He unrolled another map, this one of the capital itself, and pointed to a spot on the outskirts. "It will put us right where we need to be. In the shadows, just above the archive's entrance." The plan was taking shape. It was desperate, dangerous, and bordered on impossible. But as Kalin looked from the determined face of Rhea to the loyal eyes of Torvin and the rest of his parents' followers, he felt a strength he had never known. The heartstone pulsed at his hip, a steady, rhythmic beat. It was the heart of his father's plan, and the heart of their new rebellion. The final battle was coming. The smuggler's tunnel was a tight, cloying darkness that smelled of wet earth and centuries of disuse. For 2 days, their small company moved in near silence, guided by Torvin and the flickering light of a few shielded lanterns. The group was small but potent: Kalin, Rhea, and Torvin, along with the 2 warriors who had first stood in the longhouse, the grizzled swordsman, Graves, and the nimble dagger-wielder, Alara. They emerged into a damp, stone-lined cistern deep beneath the capital city. The air here was stale, thick with the scent of decay and stagnant water. Above them, they could hear the faint, muffled sounds of the bustling city. "We're in the Undercroft," Torvin whispered, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "The oldest part of the city's foundation. The entrance to the catacombs and the sunken archive is half a league from here." They moved through the labyrinthine maintenance tunnels, their footsteps splashing in the shallow, murky water. The walls were slick with grime, and strange, unsettling sounds echoed from deeper, unexplored passages, the scrape of stone on stone, the distant drip of water, and something else, a low, guttural chittering that made the hairs on Kalin's neck stand up. "Ghouls," Graves muttered, his hand tightening on his sword. "The sorcerer's magic seeps into everything down here. Twists things." As they rounded a corner, they saw it. A massive, circular stone doorway, sealed with iron bands and inscribed with runes that glowed with a sickly, purple light, the unmistakable mark of the sorcerer's power. This was the main entrance to the archive's outer sanctum. Standing guard were 2 figures in the black armor of the Umbral Legion. Their group ducked back into the shadows. "2 guards are manageable," Alara whispered, her hand already on one of her daggers. "Wait," Kalin said, holding up a hand. He felt the silver ring on his finger grow cold, a warning. At the same time, the heartstone at his hip pulsed, a slow, heavy beat of dread. Something was wrong. Just then, a 3rd figure emerged from a side tunnel. He was not a legionnaire. He wore the gray, nondescript robes of a city scribe, but he moved with a chilling purpose. He approached the Legion guards, who bowed their heads in deference. The man placed a hand on the sealed door, and the purple runes flared, the stone door grinding open just enough for him to slip through before sealing itself once more. "That was a magister," Torvin breathed, his face grim. "One of the sorcerer's lieutenants. They rarely leave his side." "Something is happening inside." "We need a distraction," Rhea said, her eyes narrowed as she studied the guards. "Something to pull them away from that door." "I have an idea," Kalin said, looking at a network of pipes and pressure valves on the far wall. He pointed, laying out a quick, risky plan. While Graves and Alara created a diversion at the far end of the hall, Kalin and Rhea would use the commotion to approach the door. Graves nodded and, with Alara moving like a shadow behind him, disappeared down the corridor. Moments later, a loud clang echoed through the tunnels, followed by a hiss of escaping steam. The 2 Legion guards tensed, drawing their curved swords. "What was that?" one hissed. "Go check it out," the other commanded. "I'll hold the door." As one of the guards jogged down the hall, Kalin and Rhea moved. Rhea slipped into the deep shadows near the door, her bow drawn, an arrow nocked. Kalin walked forward, stepping into the dim torchlight, his father's journal in his hand. The remaining guard spun around, his eyes widening. You, the legacy child. Kalin held up the journal. I have something your master wants, he said, his voice steady. A gift. To show my loyalty. The guard hesitated, his greed and suspicion warring in his eyes. It was the opening Kalin needed. He lunged, not with his sword, but with his mind focused on the ring. He pushed, channeling a pulse of pure energy. The guard staggered back, clutching his head as the unexpected psychic assault disoriented him. Before the guard could recover, an arrow whistled out of the darkness and buried itself in his throat. He crumpled without a sound. Rhea emerged from the shadows as Graves and Alara returned, their own work done. They stood before the sealed door. Now what? Graves asked. Kalin stepped forward and placed his ringed hand on the door. The purple runes sputtered and died as the silver light of his ring flared, overpowering them. He felt the heartstone pulse in time with his own heartbeat. He pushed, not with magic, but with the sheer force of his will, his birthright. With a deep groan, the ancient stone door slid open. The air that washed over them was cold, ancient, and humming with immense power. They were in. But as Kalin looked into the darkness of the archive's entrance, he felt a chilling certainty. They hadn't broken in unnoticed. They had been expected. The sunken archive was not a library of scrolls and books. It was a vast, circular chamber, its walls lined with glowing crystalline conduits that pulsed with a network of arcane energy. At the center of the chamber, a massive, suspended crystal, as large as a boulder, glowed with a corrupt, violet light. This was the heart of the sorcerer's power, the focusing lens his father had written about, now twisted to serve a dark purpose. Tendrils of this purple energy snaked out from the central crystal, feeding into the conduits on the walls, spreading their poison throughout the realm's magical web. The air was heavy, charged with a power so immense it was difficult to breathe. The chamber was silent, but it was a predatory silence, filled with a palpable sense of menace. This is it, Kalin breathed, his eyes wide with awe and horror. He could feel the raw power here, a symphony of magic that was beautiful and terrifying all at once. Spread out. Watch for traps, Torvin commanded, his voice a low growl. Graves, Alara, cover the entrance. Don't let anything follow us in. As the two warriors took their positions, Kalin, Rhea, and Torvin advanced cautiously toward the central crystal. Kalin opened his father's journal, his eyes scanning the schematics. The conduits on the walls are regulators, he explained, pointing. We need to sever their connection to the main crystal. According to these notes, there are 3 primary regulator nodes. If we can overload them, it should disrupt the feedback loop long enough for me to use the heartstone on the central crystal itself. Where are the nodes? Rhea asked, scanning the walls, her bow ready. Before Kalin could answer, a voice, smooth and cold as polished ice, echoed through the chamber. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. Looking for these? 3 sections of the wall shimmered, and the conduits flared. Standing before each of the 3 regulator nodes was a magister, their gray robes unmoving, their faces hidden in the deep shadows of their hoods. And standing beside the central crystal, a faint, condescending smile on his face, was the man from the tavern in Elder Grove. The man who had given him the ring. You led us right to them, Rhea snarled at Kalin, her bow swinging around to aim at the stranger. He did, the man said with a chuckle. But not for the reasons you think. I am Malek. And I am not your enemy. He gestured to the magisters. They are. With a flick of Malek's wrist, the magisters crumpled to the ground, their forms dissolving into black smoke. What is this? Torvin demanded, his axe held ready. Unnecessary deception, Malek said, his eyes fixed on Kalin. The sorcerer is powerful. His true magisters are nearly invincible. But he also has enemies within his own ranks. Those of us who remember the Legion's true purpose. We needed the key or ring and the heartstone to get in here. And we needed someone the archive would recognize as a rightful heir. You used me, Kalin said, his voice cold. We guided you, Malik corrected. Your parents' plan was brilliant, but it was incomplete. They didn't know how to protect the user from the backlash. When you purify that crystal, it will unleash a wave of raw energy. It would have incinerated you. My allies and I can help shield you, but you must be the one to channel the Heartstone. Only the blood of the first rebels can command it. From the shadows behind the central crystal, 2 more figures emerged. They were cloaked and hooded like Malik. They began chanting in a low, resonant language, and a shimmering shield of golden light began to form around this central platform. The sorcerer knows we're here, Malik said, his voice urgent. He will send his true guardians. You have to act now, Kalin. Kalin looked from the earnest face of Malik to the determined eyes of Rhea and Torvin. He had been a pawn for so long. Was this another manipulation? Or was it the only chance they had? He looked at his father's journal, at the plan to heal the world. He had come this far. He had to trust someone. Do it, he said to Malik. He turned to his own companions. Rhea, Torvin, guard the platform. Buy us time. Kalin strode onto the central platform, stepping into the golden shield. He took the Heartstone from his pouch. The orb, once a gentle warmth, now blazed with a brilliant, white-hot light in his hand, eager to be used. He looked at the corrupted, violet crystal, took a deep breath and began to channel his will, his history, and all his hope into the small, powerful stone in his hand. As Kalin began to focus his will, the massive iron doors at the chamber's entrance slammed shut, plunging the room into the eerie glow of the crystals. The very air grew cold, and a monstrous, scraping sound echoed from the darkness above. He's here, Torvin yelled, raising his axe. From the vaulted ceiling, a creature of nightmare descended. It was a gargantuan golem, forged not just from stone, but from twisted metal and jagged, dark crystals that pulsed with the same violet energy as the sorcerer's corrupted core. Its limbs were mismatched, its movements jerky but powerful, and in the center of its chest was a single, baleful, glowing purple eye. It was the Archive's ultimate guardian. That thing is ancient, Torvin roared over the golem's grinding advance. The legends call it the Archivist. Then let's make it history, Rhea shouted back. She loosed an arrow that struck the golem's shoulder. The arrow shattered on impact, doing no damage. The Archivist's eye fixed on the platform. It ignored the warriors, its sole purpose to stop the one who threatened the crystal. It raised a massive, clawed hand to smash down on the golden shield protecting Kalin. It's going for Kalin. We have to draw its attention. Torvin bellowed, charging forward. He swung his axe with all his might, burying the blade in the golem's leg. The stone cracked, but the golem barely seemed to register the blow. It swatted Torvin aside with a contemptuous flick of its wrist, sending him crashing into the far wall. Torvin! Kalin cried out, his concentration wavering. Stay focused, lad. Torvin groaned, struggling to rise. This is our fight. Rhea, agile and swift, darted around the golem, firing arrows at its single eye. The enchanted shafts bounced off a shimmering barrier of purple energy. Its eye is the weak point, but it's shielded, she yelled. Meanwhile, on the platform, Kalin fought a battle of his own. He held the Heartstone aloft, pouring his energy into it. A beam of pure white light shot out, striking the violet crystal. The crystal shrieked, a high-pitched, psychic scream that reverberated through the chamber. The purple light flickered, and for a moment, the shield around the golem's eye wavered. Now! Kalin shouted. Rhea didn't hesitate. She loosed a black-fletched arrow, one she had been saving. It flew true, piercing the weakened shield and sinking deep into the golem's glowing eye. The Archivist let out a deafening roar of pain and rage. The purple light in its eye exploded, and the creature staggered blindly, swinging its massive arms in a frenzy. It smashed into one of the crystalline conduits lining the wall, which shattered in a shower of sparks. The entire chamber shook. It's working. Malik yelled over the din, his own concentration fixed on maintaining the shield around Kalin. Keep pressing, Kalin. Break the core. Kalin gritted his teeth, sweat pouring down his face. The backlash from the crystal was immense, a wave of dark energy pushing back against him. His muscles screamed in protest, and his vision began to blur. He felt the golden shield around him crackle under the strain. He channeled everything he had left, the memory of his parents, the hope of sanctuary, the faces of his friends fighting for him. He gave one final, desperate push. The heartstone flared, unleashing a blinding wave of white light that completely enveloped the central crystal. There was a moment of absolute silence. Then, with a sound like 1,000 panes of glass shattering at once, the violet crystal cracked. The corrupt purple light within imploded, and a shockwave of pure, cleansed energy erupted outwards. It washed over the entire chamber, not as a destructive force, but as a cleansing wave. The conduits on the walls flickered from purple to a soft, golden white. The wounded golem froze, the dark magic animating it gone, and then crumbled into a pile of inert stone and metal. The backlash hit Kalin like a physical blow. The heartstone fell from his numb fingers, its light fading to a gentle glow. He collapsed to his knees, utterly spent, as Malek and his allies dropped their protective shield, their own faces pale with exhaustion. They had done it. His father's plan had worked. But as the dust settled, a new sound reached them. From the now-sealed entrance, a slow, deliberate clapping began. A figure emerged from the deepest shadows of the chamber, a place they had not seen. He was tall and gaunt, clad in ornate black robes, and his face was a mask of cold, aristocratic fury. It was the sorcerer himself. A truly impressive display, the sorcerer said, his voice dripping with venom. You have purged my archive. You have undone decades of my work. His eyes, burning with a cold, dark fire, fixed on Kalin. But you have also left yourself defenseless. And you have brought me the one thing I still needed to complete my ascension. He wasn't looking at the now purified crystal. He was looking at Kalin. The blood of the rightful heir, the sorcerer hissed, a cruel smile spreading across his lips. Thank you for the delivery. A palpable dread fell over the chamber, heavier and more terrifying than the presence of the golem. This was not a monster of stone and metal. This was the source of the rot, the mastermind whose dark influence had haunted Kalin's entire life. You've lost, sorcerer, Torvin growled, pushing himself to his feet, his axe held ready despite his injuries. Your power source is cleansed. The sorcerer laughed, a dry, rasping sound that scraped against their nerves. My power source? Foolish old man. The archive was merely a tool to shape the world. My power comes from a much deeper well. He raised a hand, and black, shadowy tendrils erupted from the floor, lashing out like vipers. Graves and Alara, still by the door, were caught instantly, ensnared and pulled into the suffocating darkness. No, Kalin cried, struggling to stand. Don't you see? The sorcerer said, taking a slow step toward the platform. I don't need the archive to be corrupted. I need it to be receptive. You've wiped the slate clean for me. Once I anoint the purified crystal with the blood of the heir, I will not just influence the world's magic. I will become it. Malek and his two allies stepped forward, creating a wall between the sorcerer and the platform. We won't let you have him, Malek vowed. The sorcerer merely smiled. Your rebellion ends here. He flicked his wrist, and the shadowy tendrils converged on the three rebels. They raised their own golden shields, but the darkness slammed into them with overwhelming force, shattering their defenses and casting them aside like broken dolls. Rhea loosed an arrow, but the sorcerer caught it in midair, inches from his face. The wooden shaft turned to ash in his grasp. A hunter's trinkets are useless against a god. He was unstoppable. Kalin watched, helpless, as Rhea and Torvin placed themselves between him and the advancing sorcerer, a last, desperate line of defense. It was then that Kalin saw it. Lying on the platform beside him, the heartstone was pulsing with a soft, steady light. But his father's journal lay open to the final page. In his exhausted state, he had missed the last few lines of text, written in a shakier hand than the rest. Should the purification not be enough, should the source of the corruption remain, the heartstone has one final purpose. It cannot destroy a master of the void, but it can contain him. The archive is a lens, but it is also a prison. It will require a willing warden, a sacrifice of blood and spirit to turn the key one last time. A warden. A sacrifice. Kalin understood. His father hadn't just created a plan to heal the world, he had created a contingency to save it. Rhea. Torvin. Get back. Kalin shouted, his voice ringing with a desperate authority. He scooped up the heartstone. The sorcerer paused, intrigued by the sudden shift in Kalin's demeanor. A final act of defiance? What can you possibly do now, boy? Kalin looked at his friends, at the faces of the people who had followed him, who had believed in him. He looked at the sorcerer, the embodiment of the darkness his parents had fought against. He knew what he had to do. He held the heartstone to the gash on his forearm, letting his own blood soak into the glowing crystal. The stone flared, its white light turning a brilliant, fiery gold. The blood of the heir anoints the key, Kalin chanted, the words coming to him from a place of deep, instinctual knowledge. I name myself Warden. I bind the darkness. This prison will hold. No, the sorcerer shrieked, realizing too late what was happening. He lunged for Kalin, his face a mask of fury. But it was too late. Kalin slammed the blood-soaked heartstone back onto the central crystal. A lattice of golden energy erupted from the crystal, shooting across the chamber and wrapping around the sorcerer, encasing him in a cage of pure light. The shadowy tendrils dissolved. The oppressive atmosphere vanished. The sorcerer roared, thrashing against his cage, but the golden light held firm. The entire archive pulsed with this new, binding energy. Kalin fell to his knees, the strength leaving his body. A faint, golden shimmer began to emanate from his own skin. He was becoming part of the prison. His life forced the anchor for the sorcerer's cage. Rhea rushed to his side, her face stricken. Kalin, what have you done? I finished it, he whispered, a faint, tired smile on his lips. It was the only way. His form was becoming translucent, more light than substance. Tell them we won. Torvin and the others gathered around, their faces a mixture of awe and profound grief. Malek, stirring from where he had been thrown, looked on with solemn understanding. Kalin's last glance was at Rhea. He saw the hunter who had become his partner, his friend. His vision faded into a sea of golden light, and his last sensation was not of pain or fear, but of peace. He had fulfilled his parents' legacy. He had saved them all. The sunken archive grew silent. The sorcerer was caged, his power contained. But the victory had come at the ultimate price. The hero who had cleansed the world had become its eternal, silent guardian. The silence in the sunken archive was absolute. The sorcerer remained frozen in his golden cage, a silent testament to a victory bought with the ultimate sacrifice. The light from the central crystal was no longer violet or white, but a soft, steady gold, Kalin's light. It was warm, peaceful, and eternal. Rhea stood before the crystal, one hand resting on its smooth, glowing surface. She could feel him there, not as a voice or a mind, but as a presence. A steadfast, unwavering warmth that held the darkness at bay. It had been a week since the battle. Torvin, Malek, and the other survivors had sealed the archive, leaving only the hidden entrance known to them. The capital city above continued its bustling life, unaware of the war won and the hero lost in its foundations. The subtle, corrupting influence of the sorcerer was gone from the land. The crops would grow truer, the people would sleep easier, and no one would ever know why. Torvin placed a gentle hand on Rhea's shoulder. He's at peace, lass. He saved us all. Rhea nodded, not taking her eyes off the crystal. I know. She had found a new purpose in the aftermath. She would be the guardian of the guardian. She would ensure that the entrance to the archive remained hidden, that no one would ever stumble upon this place and risk breaking the seal. Her hunt was over, but her vigil had just begun. What of your brother? Torvin asked softly. I'll find him, Rhea said, her voice filled with a quiet certainty. I'll find him, and I'll tell him what happened here. I'll tell him about Kalin. She finally turned from the crystal, her face set with a new resolve. The world needs to remember the truth. Not the Order's lies or the Legion's myths. The real story. Together, They left the archive, sealing the stone door of the sanctuary's tunnel behind them. In the years that followed, whispers began to spread across the land. They were not tales of knights or sorcerers, but of a new kind of legend. They spoke of the silent warden, a guardian spirit who kept the deepest darknesses of the world in check. And they spoke of the shadow hunter, a lone woman who traveled the roads, protecting the innocent and sharing stories of a young hero who chose sacrifice over glory. The Umbral Legion, its master imprisoned, fractured and faded back into the shadows. The Order of Knights, its foundation of lies now irrelevant, slowly lost its influence. The world, scarred but saved, began to heal. And deep beneath the capital, in a chamber of golden light, Kalin kept his eternal watch. He was no longer a boy, a knight, or an heir. He was a symbol, a testament to the idea that true legacies are not inherited by blood, but are forged in the choices one makes. His sacrifice had not been an end, but the beginning of a new, brighter age.